It's a good question. I mean, initially I got into the football tactics side of things because I played. And I think a lot of people would be surprised by that, because usually the route into tactics is not always, but often from a non-playing side. Whereas for me, I went to university and played for my university's first team. So played to a decent level, and was involved in the coaching. I went through the coaching side of things as a player for 4 years when I was at university. And in the final year there, I actually started working with the women's team at the university as well. So I was already starting to think about, how you might do coaching. A lot of that for me was just, this is how I've done it. This is how people have showed me to do it in the past. So I'll just do that kind of thing, but in a different sphere. I then went and did grad work, and while I was there, spent 4 or 5 seasons working with the women's team at the new university I was at. And at that point, it was sort of a lot more serious. I was the head coach, so I was in charge of everything, including driving the minibus around. So we used to drive all over the place to places like Loughborough and Nottingham, and so that was an experience. But when you're in that kind of situation, you start. I am curious enough to be like, well, okay, I've got to sort of understand what we're trying to achieve on the pitch. I've got to find the way that, different coaching methods, different approaches. And when you do that, you necessarily end up with, thinking about the tactical aspects of the game. So for me, I arrived at tactics through having coached, and my interest was very much practical. I then sort of spent a little bit longer where actually it wasn't, I stopped doing the coaching for a little while, and was moving into the media sphere a little bit more. And I guess I was sort of more interested in the I guess you could call it high journalism, but I mean, the distinction between high culture and low culture, as you'll know, is bullshit. So, but this idea that people who do journalism should be the people who can write well, and it's about
right. Journalism shouldn't be for the journalists. Journalism should be for everybody. Yeah. And actually, eventually, I was doing grad work. As you mentioned, I was in academia for about 10 years. I was doing a PhD and was also lecturing at the same time. Got to the end of the PhD, handed in, was given major corrections. And at that point, I'd basically run out of funding because I'd been funded to do the PhD. So I was working in a pub to stay alive. And at that point, I was doing a huge amount of moonlighting as a football journalist. And at that point, I got an offer for a job working for an online outlet as the football editor. And I was like, this is the first foot on the ladder. Either I can spend the next year finishing off a PhD and to essentially like guarantee, well, not even guarantee, but to essentially force myself down the academic route, which originally I'd always thought would be where I ended up, or I can do this have this incredible opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do. And I went with my gut and said, right, I'll not finish the PhD. I'll go into football journalism, and that was sort of how I ended up going into the journalistic side of things. But at that point, I don't think I was a particularly insightful or profound reader of the game, and so I started getting into it a little bit more. I have a friendship group of people. I actually joined a group chat on Twitter must have been around 2017, with people who now have all ended up getting very good jobs in the industry here, there, and everywhere. And by hook or by crook, they sort of dragged me kicking and screaming towards being able to analyze football a little bit better. By the time 2018-19 happens, we've got Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds, and then that's when I really started thinking, right, I want to understand how this is working. I started a podcast called All Stats Aren't We, which was a Leeds fan podcast, which was focused on the tactics and the stats. In May of 2018.
There we go. And spent 5 years doing that. It's still running. I still sort of help them out behind the scenes, and it's still going. And I'm incredibly proud of that outlet, because I think we filled a niche that wasn't being filled. We moved the needle in the Leeds United space. We did annoy a lot of people, but because necessarily you annoy people when you talk about tactics and stats and you tell them to trust the process when Pat Bamford's missed another chance.
You annoy people telling people to look both ways crossing the street, brother. It's fine.
Sure, it's true. And yeah, from there, I was freelancing at this point because I'd stopped working as the football editor for the company I joined. I did some work for Analytics FC, worked as their head of content for a little while. And then, the TIFO job happened. So that's the sort of potted history of how I ended up where I am. But the interest originally was through coaching, and eventually sort of got towards that more technical approach to football tactics. And actually, it's worked out quite nicely. I think I've been able to add something to the media space. And it's, as I said before, an incredibly fun job to be able to think about how football is sort of working behind the scenes.